I really made a whole thing of it in my August wrap up. I was like, goodbye summer, sorry, it's time for, you know, cold girl autumn, you know, we're ready for the autumn vibes. And then I was cursed. I rode the underground in London in 28-degree heat in September. That is a hate crime. Anyway, the little black notebook is back, so we know what time it is. It is time to do my roundup of my favourite first watches in the months of July and August. So July, weirdly, was a pitiful month for watching films, and maybe it was because I was on the move a little bit. Honestly, I couldn't really tell you what I was doing in July. But in July, there was 3 new watches and 4 rewatches, so like, not good. Pitiful. Only 7 films watched overall in a month. No. Although I made up for it in August, where I had 17 new watches and 0 rewatches. 0 rewatches. I think that's how you can tell that maybe my mental health got a little bit better in August, because I was 1, watching more films, and 2, watching more new films. It's always a bad sign if you go on my Letterboxd diary and there's like 5 million rewatches in a month. That means I'm seeking out comfort, it means I'm sad. Whereas 17 new watches, things are good. So that means that our little chart or whatever that I've been doing sort of now looks like this. And I believe that my total new films watched in 2021 is 64, which is okay. Could be better, could be worse. Before we get on to the new watches, I'm going to just rattle through what my rewatches were in the month of July, which was Cheaper by the Dozen, number 1 and number 2, the 3rd Harry Potter film, and Confessions of a Teenage Drama Queen, which, by the way, is so good. I think it's a Lindsay Lohan film that gets like the least amount of hype, although actually maybe that's Herbie, I don't know. But like Parent Trap, Mean Girls, everyone considers like classics, you know, we always go back to them, we always talk about them, important part of the lexicon. I don't really hear people talking about Confessions of a Teenage Drama Queen. And it is so good, and it is so like strange, and it is like so unique. I don't think a coming of age film has been made like that. It's like very stylized, very over dramatic. It has these weird sort of animation bits. Megan Fox is also in it. So is Alison Pill. Those of you who've watched like Newsroom and Scott Pilgrim will know who she is. She's in that, like very young as well. Just a really interesting film, and it's also about like friendship and romance, your normal stuff, but like fandom as well, and that's specifically why I went back to it, because I want to maybe make something around, you know, fandom and being a fan of a musician or a band in your teens. That's something that I relate to very much, and that's something that this film does well, so I would recommend that, even though it's not a first watch. But like, go back to it if you haven't for a while, and you might be pleasantly surprised. It is cringe, don't get me wrong, but it's fun. It's very fun. So let's get into the films that were my favourite that I watched for the first time in the months of July and August, and coming in at number 10 is Yes, God, Yes. And this is a very quiet, meditative film, and I'm always wary about recommending films like these because I know that people will be like, nothing happened, it was boring. Those 2 things might be true to some people, but just because a film is slow and uneventful doesn't mean that nothing much happens. It's very much a film that feels like a capture of a moment in time. So we follow Alice, who is going to a Catholic school. She's being raised Catholic, and she's having certain questions, not necessarily questions because she doesn't actually ask these questions, but she is just sort of basically coming into her sexuality and coming into her own, and she feels a lot of guilt around that, because obviously what you're taught in the Catholic faith is that, you know, that's not for you, you know, don't be doing that, it upsets God. And her sort of Catholic peers and teachers sort of see this like disloyalty, I don't really know how you describe it, basically a sense that her faith might be wavering. So her and her sort of congregation go on this like religious retreat that like is infamous in the church for like being this very spiritual, very like life-affirming, faith-affirming trip. And it was really interesting for me to watch it because I didn't grow up religious, and my partner grew up Catholic and went to a Catholic school and has a lot of sort of baggage around that, and I have a few friends that do as well. And so whenever I hear certain stories about that life growing up, I'm like, oh my god, that's crazy. And it almost to me seems a bit, you know, culty. It's very strange, the sort of things you're told to believe and the fear that's used to make you believe them. And so in my head I sort of big it up as like, oh, this horrible thing that happened to you. But this film is very mundane, and I think that's probably what it feels like when you're growing up in that space. You don't see it as this big, scary, problematic thing that's happening to you. you just see it as this like boring thing that you have to do sometimes. And I think John Mulaney has a skit where he talks about that, where people hear that he was an altar boy as a child, and they're like, oh my god, and they think that he's all damaged, but it was just like boring shit he had to do on the weekend that he didn't want to do. It isn't this big shocking thing. A lot of it is just like these small quiet moments that you just get disillusioned and you're like, this is weird and not cool. And that's what this film was basically. And I thought it was done really well. I thought the lead performance by Natalia Dyer from Stranger Things, she plays Nancy, was amazing. She's such an expressive face. Like, there's not a lot of dialogue where she's explicitly saying that she doubts the Catholic faith, but you just get all of that through her expressions, like when she's going through these rituals and routines. It's just a little capture of this young woman at this moment in time where she's just having a lot of doubts, and it's just done very nicely, very well. I recommend it. Number 9 on my list is Summer of Soul, which is available on Disney+, and this is a film documenting the Harlem Cultural Festival, which took place in 1969, I believe, and I think it was the same year as Woodstock, and it is sometimes labelled as like the Black Woodstock. And it was this cultural art festival that took place in Harlem. It had huge crowds, and it was this joyous celebration of, you know, black culture, black music, and just black community. And I think at that time, obviously, racial tensions were very high, and the documentary goes into that, what the backdrop of that summer was like, the riots and fights with police that broke out in that summer. But this moment was just like a huge relief and a distraction from all that, and I think partly that's some of the reason why it was brought about, was to, you know, take people off the streets and bring them to this festival. And basically the footage of this festival has been lost, sitting in a basement for like 50 years or whatever, and it's just recently been uncovered and cut together, and it's now on Disney+, and it's just a wonderful, joyous, celebratory festival. And if you like music, if you like that period of history, definitely give it a watch. It's very enjoyable. My number 8 for the month was Black Widow, and I don't actually think that I have that much to say about Black Widow. It is what you think a Black Widow film would be, but I think because I saw it in the cinema, and you know, I haven't been to the cinema as much as I'd like this year or over the last year, I just had a nice time seeing like a big flashy blockbuster with cool stunts and like good acting. I was like, this is what the cinema is for. Obviously not just for Marvel. There's other ways to use cinema, but I just think I really enjoyed seeing like a big flashy film on the big cinema screen, because I've obviously been watching stuff mostly on my laptop for the last year, and still I only really justify a cinema trip if it's something that I think will be made better by seeing it in the cinema. And this was just fun. It was really fun. And Florence Pugh, can we talk about Florence Pugh? She was incredible. And that brings me nicely on to my number 7 pick, which was James Gunn's The Suicide Squad, which obviously, as we know, is a sort of, I don't know, soft reboot of the Suicide Squad film that we got, allegedly, in 2016, that was directed by David Ayer, famously shit. Although, it does have an Oscar for Best Hair and Makeup, so it is an Oscar-winning film. And I don't know if I enjoyed James Gunn's version so much more because the other one was so shit and my expectations were sort of low, but I just think this film has such a sense of authorship, and I feel like a lot of movies that are in the superhero lexicon, mostly Marvel, I feel like have this formula, have this brand of humour, this brand of banter, and they just take those steps, and that's fine, because when you go into a superhero film you sort of know what you want, and if you get given that, fine, like what else do you need? But I really do enjoy it when you see a film like that does have that structure and formula still, but has a real sense of voice behind it. You're like, okay, this filmmaker could have only made it like this. For example, Thor Ragnarok, like that screams Taika Waititi. When you're watching that film, you're like, okay, yeah, Taika made this. Or like when you're watching the new Suicide Squad, you're like, okay, this is very James Gunn. And I love his Guardians of the Galaxy films, but the Suicide Squad had a lot more blood and gore and swearing, and that was just something really fun that I think he doesn't get to play with very often, obviously, in Marvel, so it was just nice to see that side of him and see that sort of like darker, sort of like grittier style. I really liked it, I had fun, and again, Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn, just perfect. Next at number 6 we have a film called Giant Little Ones, which, yeah, exactly, what is this film? Who knows? So in this film we follow 2 male high school best friends, and they're both sort of popular, sporty, they're on like the hockey teams and the swim teams, and they both have like attractive girls that they're, you know, seen with and whatever. They're just your stereotypical sort of popular, well-liked high school boys. And then one of them has a birthday party, I think it's like a 17th birthday party, and after that birthday party, when they're both a little bit drunk, something sexual happens between them, and you don't really know exactly what happens. It's not gratuitous in the film, it literally happens like under the covers. You're not quite sure what's happening until it cuts to the next scene. And our main character, who I've forgotten his name, I think is quite okay with this encounter. Like, I think he was the soberer one, and his friend was like a little bit drunk, and I think his friend did sort of come on to him. But then when they're in school, the friend who came on to him spreads a rumor that basically the main character came on to him while he was asleep, and obviously a lot of the people at school start, you know, staying away from the main boy. This would be so much easier to explain if I remember their fucking names, wouldn't it? God. But basically, yeah, their friendship deteriorates. Our main character starts going through a bit of a crisis because everyone at school is calling him gay, like, you're gay, you're a pervert, you whatever. And his family hear what's happening, and they're like, hey, you know, if you want to open up to us, like, this is totally fine, like, you know, people are okay with this now, like, why is this like a struggle for you? And he's like, I'm not gay. And he really has this sort of internal struggle with it, because he does like girls and he has a sexual relationship with a girl in the film, and he is sort of really struggling with this stigma, because he's like, well, I don't regret what happened with his male friend, but like, he doesn't think that he's gay. And there's this really nice moment at the end of the film where he's talking to his father, who came out as gay like years and years later after he'd, you know, married a woman and had a family. And he's like, well, you know, do you think that I'm gay? Like, what do you think? And his father's like, well, maybe you don't need to know that yet. Maybe you just had a sexual experience with someone that you loved, and that's all it has to be. You know, and if it happens again with, you know, someone of the same sex, great. If it doesn't, fine. You know, and that was just so refreshing to me. There is so much media and LGBT fiction around coming out and finding your community and being totally uplifted and embraced by this community, and that being like so amazing and like, isn't it great? But that's not every queer person's experience, and I always welcome more media that shows that experience as something that is confusing and that you don't always get an easy answer at the end of it. Like, even if you find a label that fits you, that is still subject to change, and just because you have had experiences with a person of the same sex doesn't mean that you have to immediately put a label on. It doesn't mean that you have to change how you define yourself. And I really, really loved that. I think it was a really nice message, something that I would have really valued in my teenage years, and I think something that we should be talking about more. I mean, I get why the sort of nice coming out, being embraced by this community, shouting loud and proud about who you are, I get why that's popular and why we get more of that, but also that just wasn't my experience and isn't a lot of young questioning people's experiences. So I feel like whenever there's a film like this or a book like this, I really want to shout about it because it just feels so much truer to me, and I really loved it. At number 5 we have Candyman, the 1992 version, which I watched in preparation for the 2021 remake by Nia DaCosta, and I really thought that it was just going to be a run-of-the-mill 90s slasher film, and it was so much more than that. Instead, I got a really clever, visually stunning, visually textured film about relying on mythology to deal with your everyday trauma, about gentrification in sort of small suburban American towns, and the treatment of people of colour in lower income areas. And it was just really effective. The score by Philip Glass is incredible, the visuals are incredible. It's set mostly on this sort of, I don't know if it's called an estate, I mean obviously in the UK we call them estates, but I think in America they're called more like the projects. So it's set in this place called Cabrini Green, which is this sort of complex for, you know, lower income individuals, mostly people of colour, and it's about the sort of violence that happens in these places that obviously doesn't really get addressed by the local authorities, and then they just sort of try and push out the criminals, and then it just gets gentrified basically. And then because of all the violence that happens in this community, in this area, a myth of this figure, the Candyman, starts to sort of emerge, and the guy who plays him is fucking terrifying, and it's just really effective, you know, really, really good horror. And it's not like a revolutionary idea, but the best horror is always, you know, horror that shows the everyday horror in your society, not about some creepy ghost or whatever that's not real. It's about the horror of these actual people's lives. But it was very well done. I really, really loved it. And ironically, I think me liking it so much ruined the newer one for me, because I just think that anything that the new one did, the 1992 version did slightly better. But yeah, I recommend it. Go and see it. It's very good. It's on Now TV if you've got that. And it's on Netflix too, so literally no excuse. Go and watch it. And my fourth favourite first watch of the month of July, August, I can't remember which one I saw it in, was Zola. And if you're an avid social media person, if you're just on Twitter a lot, you probably will remember the viral tweet thread by Zola King. And in this tweet thread, Zola recounts this trip that she took to Florida with a girl that she barely really knew, but they were going to Florida to make a lot of money, earn money dancing and stripping for the weekend, and it just completely went awry. Like, everything that could have gone wrong on that trip went wrong. It was a wild ride, it was very fun. The tweet thread went completely viral, and literally the next day it had been optioned for film rights, so now we have the film. And obviously going in, having read that tweet thread, I really already knew the events that were gonna fold out, but it was still enjoyable watching them play out in that way. And the lead performances are really great. I loved how it looked visually. It was actually shot on 16mm film, I believe, and it gives it this really dreamy sort of old age Hollywood vibe, which I thought was really interesting. Is that obviously in the old age of Hollywood we got these big, beautiful, you know, romantic, daring epics that looked, you know, stunning and this sort of grainy quality. And the method of using, you know, analog film rather than digital film to shoot Zola did give it this sort of like old epic but sort of modern twist vibe. Like, this is a sort of golden age epic for the Twitter social media age, and it was just really beautifully done. I really, really liked it. Can't really fault it, and I would recommend it. And now we're into the top three. So coming in at number 3 is Another Round, which won the Best Foreign Film Oscar, I believe, or was it just Best Film? I can't remember. It won an Oscar, basically. Very well deserved. Very good film. So in this film we follow a teacher that is played by Mads Mikkelsen, and he is kind of in like a rut in life. You know, his classes have sort of lost their verve, his students are really struggling to like keep up, and they're worried about their exams. They don't think that he's doing a good enough job teaching them. His marriage is like a little bit cold. He never really sees his wife. They're always on different shifts. They're like passing in the night. They just are quite disconnected, and I feel like, you know, his life is sort of at a point where he's just like going on autopilot. And his group of friends who are also teachers at the school sort of notice what's going on with him, and they just go out for dinner for someone's birthday, and they sort of get into this big discussion. And there's been a paper recently published where somebody hypothesizes that the way to best live your life is to be like 0.5% drunk, or with like 0.5% of alcohol in your blood at all times, which is like 2 glasses of wine a day or something. And that's like the optimum way to live your life in terms of like health benefits, also just personality benefits, you know, to keep mental illness at bay or whatever. And they sort of scoff about this. They don't really believe it, and they sort of, you know, banter about it for a while. But then they actually decide to do it, and they do this experiment where they, you know, drink a little bit of alcohol each day and see if their life improves. And slowly the amount of alcohol that they're drinking each day gets more and more and more, and obviously you can imagine that this begins to affect their lives in quite real ways. And I really don't want to say too much more about it, because I feel like, one, a lot has already been said much more succinctly and much more eloquently than I ever could, because it has been a film that has been so publicised, because it won Oscars, and, you know, it's a very good film. But it's also a film that I think you value most when you don't really know what it's going to be. Like, I went into it thinking it was going to be like a fun caper about drinking and friendship, and it was a lot more than that. It hits quite hard at some places, and I just think it is a film that will reward you for not having any expectations about it. So please go and seek it out. It is definitely worth the hype. And my number 2 favourite of the month was The Kid Detective, which I absolutely loved. We follow this character called Abe Applebaum, who when he was a kid was the town's kid detective. He solved really petty crimes like where is the neighbour's cat and who stole the money from the church, and gained a bit of a reputation for himself. And the way that this is shot in the film is sort of like this wholesome, like Wes Anderson, almost like Secret Seven type vibe, like almost something from a kid's storybook, like a hero that you would read about when you're younger. And then we cut to him now, and he's a 31-year-old man who is very disillusioned. He peaked way too early, and when the mayor's daughter went missing, he couldn't find her, and that sort of derailed his career when he was 12. And now he's still depressed, he doesn't really have a sense of self, and he's really bored of the petty, trivial cases that keep being brought to him, until one day a young high school girl comes in and says that her boyfriend was murdered and that the police aren't doing enough to solve it, and will Abe give her the help that she needs. And this is the big opportunity that he's been looking for to finally prove himself. It is so good. It really toes this line between comedy, noir, and really dark themes, and if I wasn't enjoying it so much, I would have sat there and analysed how it was doing that, you know, with the cinematography and the script writing. Like, how is it actually towing this line between humour and some really dark themes? I couldn't tell you, it just does it very well, and it's a very enjoyable film whilst being quite a heavy film at the same time. And in a weird way, I was like comforted by it, because I think I'm a person who is really hard on themselves for not having made it. I've had moments where I've unironically been like, oh, I've been on this planet for 23 years and I have nothing to show for it, just because I didn't make it as like a teenager, you know, by doing YouTube, or like I didn't make it on TikTok and become a millionaire by the time I was like 13. Like, that doesn't mean I've not lived a life, right? But I often get down on myself for like not having had success at this point in my life. And it was sort of comforting to me watching the other end of that, the other extreme, where this kid like peaked at the age of 12 and then his life just went downhill since then. And obviously, like, this isn't a real story, it's not like rooted in real life at all. It is trying to be a modern silly take on a noir film, but I still found it really comforting, whether that was the filmmaker's intent or not. I was like, oh, see, that's what can happen if you peak early. At least I haven't done that, you know? And Adam Brody is the main guy, the kid detective who is now the man detective, and he is incredible in it. He's so good. If you watch the OC, you'll know who he is. I don't actually like his character in the OC, but he redeemed himself with this film. He's also in Ready or Not. He had a small role in Promising Woman where he was, you know, sufficiently shit. That was what the role required of him, and he was good in it. So I'm really ready for the Adam Brody reconnaissance. You know, maybe he's going to do Matthew McConaughey and he's going to really come into his own, and I'm ready for it because he's incredibly talented, and this film is wonderful and I really, really recommend it. And here we go, we finally reached my number one pick of the month, and it was Limbo, which is just a stunning film. I always hesitate to call it a beautiful film or a stunning film because I don't really want to romanticize it. It is a film about the refugee crisis, and we follow some refugees who have made it to Scotland, and they're sort of in like a holding place. They're in limbo, basically. That's what the title of the film, you know, is. They're in this in-between place and they're waiting for their, you know, paperwork to be approved and for their settled status to come through. And similar to the last film, although very different in tone and content, it is a tough balancing act. You don't want to tell a refugee story that is just so depressing and sad that you just leave the cinema feeling defeated and deflated and like helpless. But you also don't want to make a heartwarming, charming, uplifting film about being a refugee, because we all know that's not the experience. And this film really, again, so elegantly toes that line between utter pain and despair and, you know, what it feels like to leave your entire family, everything that you know, to a place that is not going to welcome you, and how alienating and how heartbreaking that is. But then it also shows you the humour in it. You know, it has a very funny, strange opening scene, and it's almost absurd. It's like something out of a Lynch film. You're like, what am I looking at? And it really does find the quiet humour in that experience, and it is just stunning. The performances are incredible from all of the leads. I just can't fault it. It's a perfect film. It is a perfect film. There was nothing I would change about it. The cinematography is gorgeous. Some shots almost reminded me of a sci-fi film. There's a bit where they're all queuing for the phone booth so they can, you know, call home, and the way that it's framed and the way that it's lit, it looks like this sort of spaceship. It looks really otherworldly. It looks really alien, and obviously that contributes to this general atmosphere of feeling like you're somewhere that you don't know, feeling like you're somewhere that you don't belong, feeling like you're so far away from home. It's a masterpiece. I loved it, and it was my favourite film, obviously, that I saw in the last 2 months, and I really think it's going to be up there in my favourites of the entire year. It's just incredible, and I really, really recommend that you see it. And if you're moved by it, if you have seen it and you're moved by it, please look at the resources in my description about donating to help Afghans escape the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan currently, and also Choose Love, which is a really great organisation where you can directly buy supplies for refugees, so you're not just donating X amount of money and you don't know where it goes. You can specifically on their website choose what you want to buy, so you can buy blankets for refugees, you can buy clothes, you can buy food, you can buy first aid, and obviously all of that goes directly to the people that need it the most. I think it hit me hard because obviously we're already seeing the effects of climate change this year, and we have been for many years, but obviously they've been in, you know, third world countries, or like they've not been in the West, in sort of richer countries, so we've sort of been able to ignore it, right? The countries that are affected most by climate change and have been for the last 10-20 years are not the ones that are causing the problem. But it was weighing heavily on my mind that like in the next few years we're really going to see huge weather changes. So many communities, so many low income communities are going to be completely displaced by climate change and will lose everything, and the need for refuge is going to just skyrocket. And I just, like, oh god, it scares me to think about, like, the need for kindness and the need for compassion. Ooh. Yeah, and it upsets me that probably the people that need to see this film the most and need to sympathise with those fleeing from war and persecution and horror, like, for fuck's sake, they're not coming to steal your job and they're not coming to just sit on benefits all day. Like, Jesus Christ, like, people that think that need to watch this film, it upsets me that they probably won't seek it out. But if you can force it on as many people as you can, please do, because it is just, one, a wonderful film, and two, it's an important message. And I always hesitate to say that because I don't want, like, people going into a film to feel like it's homework and they have to take away, like, a specific message. But, like, you know, just be kind, be compassionate. You know, we're all human beings just trying to do our best for ourselves and our families, and be kind, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, yeah, that ended on a slightly sadder note, but an important one, so yeah. That's how we're ending the video, and thank you so much for watching. As always, please let me know your thoughts on any of the films that I've mentioned in this video and what your favourites have been over the last 2 months, and I will see you very soon with another video soon. Bye.